The research station floated in the darkness of space, orbiting a frozen moon called Curios 7. Inside the station, the temperature read -40 degrees. Most humans would die in such cold. But this station was not built for humans. It was built for the Veltharin, tall beings made of living crystal who loved the freezing temperatures. Han Mireille was the only human on the station. She had been there for 3 months now, studying alien biology as part of an exchange program between Earth and the Galactic Council. Every day was a struggle against the cold. Her thermal suit worked hard to keep her alive, but she still felt the chill in her bones. Her quarters were heated to 15 degrees, which felt like summer compared to the rest of the station. But it was still cold by human standards. She missed warmth. Real warmth. The kind that soaked into your skin and made you feel alive. On this particular day, Mireille stood in the observation deck, looking out at the frozen moon below. The station commander, a tall Veltharin named Commander Helk, stood beside her. His crystalline body caught the light from distant stars, making him look like a living sculpture of ice. "You seem troubled, researcher Mireille," Helk said in Galactic Common, the language all species use to communicate. Mireille smiled, though it felt sad. "I was just thinking about home. About warmth." "Warmth?" Helk's voice carried curiosity. The Veltharin barely understood the concept. Their bodies generated almost no heat. "Yes. On Earth, we have this star we call the Sunday. When you stand in its light, you can feel warmth on your skin. It's like being wrapped in invisible comfort." Mireille closed her eyes, remembering. "We have blankets, too. Soft things that trap heat. And when you're cold, really cold, and you finally get somewhere warm, it's the most wonderful feeling, like your whole body sighs with relief." Helk was quiet for a moment. "This warmth brings you happiness?" "More than that. Warmth is safety. Warmth is home." What Mireille did not know was that 5 young Veltharin cubs were nearby, hiding behind a support column. They had come to the observation deck to play, but stopped when they heard the human talking. The cubs had seen Mireille before, of course. Everyone on the station knew about the strange, warm creature from Earth, but they had never really talked to her. The oldest cub was named Kale. His crystalline form was still small, barely reaching an adult Veltharin's waist. Beside him were his friends. Liss, who was shy and rarely spoke. Rin, who could never stay still. Tev, the smallest of them all. And Nira, who always made sure the others stayed safe. "Did you hear that?" Kale whispered to the others. "She makes warmth. The human makes warmth." "What's warmth?" Tev asked in a tiny voice. None of them really knew. They had heard the word before. I learned about it in their studies of other species. But knowing something in theory was different from feeling it. The cubs had only ever known cold. Even by Veltharin standards, their living quarters were kept extra cold to help their young bodies develop properly. Sometimes Tev would shiver. Even though Veltharin were not supposed to feel uncomfortable in the cold, something about Tev's crystalline structure was different. Weaker, perhaps. The cubs watched as Mireille left the observation deck. They looked at each other, eyes glowing with curiosity. Several hours passed. The station followed its regular cycle of work and rest. Mireille returned to her quarters, grateful for even the slight warmth of her private space. She made herself a cup of hot tea, holding the warm mug in both hands, and feeling a small moment of comfort. Then she heard a small sound outside her door. A scratching, like someone trying to get her attention, but too scared to knock. Mireille opened the door. There, curled up against the wall, was the smallest cub she had ever seen. Tev's crystalline body was trembling, and the light inside that usually glowed steady was flickering like a candle in wind. "Oh no," Mireille said softly. She knelt down. "Are you okay?" Tev looked up at her with wide eyes. The cub's translator device was basic, meant for learning. "Cold," Tev managed to say. "Too cold." Mireille did not hesitate. She reached out slowly, letting Tev see her movements, and then gently helped the small cub into her quarters. The door closed behind them, sealing in the precious heat. Tev stood in the center of the room, still shaking. Mirai had no idea if Veltharan cubs could get hypothermia, or whatever the equivalent was for their species. She only knew that this child needed help. "Come here," Mirai said gently. She sat on her bunk and patted the space beside her. "It's warmer here." Tev moved closer, hesitant. The cub's feet made soft clicking sounds on the metal floor. When Tev got close to Mirai, the small, crystalline body suddenly went still. "You're warm," Tev whispered in wonder. "Yes," Mirai said. "Humans make heat naturally. It's how our bodies work." Slowly, carefully, Tev reached out one small crystalline hand and touched Mirai's arm. The cub gasped. For the first time in Tev's short life, the concept of warmth became real. It was not just a word in a textbook. It was this feeling, this amazing sensation of heat seeping into crystal that had only ever known cold. "It's beautiful," Tev said. Mirai felt her heart melt. She had been so lonely on this station, so far from anything warm and familiar. And here was this small alien child, finding wonder in something Mirai had taken for granted her whole life. "Would you like to sit with me for a while?" Mirai asked. Tev nodded eagerly and climbed up onto the bunk. The cub sat, pressed against Mirai's side, soaking in the warmth. Mirai carefully wrapped a blanket around them both. It would do nothing for Tev directly, but it would help trap the heat Mirai generated. They sat together in comfortable silence. Mirai sipped her tea. Tev's trembling slowly stopped. The light inside the cub's body grew steady and bright again. "You're like a star," Tev finally said, voice full of awe. Mirai smiled. "That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me in months." After a while, Mirai helped Tev find the way back to the cub's quarters. She made sure the small Veltharan was safe before returning to her own room. She thought that would be the end of it, a small, kind moment in an otherwise cold and lonely assignment. She was wrong. The next rest cycle, Mirai heard sounds outside her door again. When she opened it, she found not one cub, but 5. Kale stood in front, with the others clustered behind him. Tev peeked out from behind Nira's legs. "Researcher Mirai," Kale said formally, though his voice shook with nervousness and excitement. "Tev told us about the warmth. We were wondering, could we maybe feel it too?" Mirai looked at the 5 young aliens standing in her doorway. Their crystalline bodies glowed with bioluminescence, making them look like living fairy lights. They looked at her with such hope, such innocent curiosity. She had come to this station to study aliens. She had expected to learn about biology, about crystalline life forms, and cold adaptation. She had not expected this. She had not expected to matter to anyone here. Mirai stepped aside and held the door open. "Come in," she said warmly. "There's plenty of room." The cubs filed in, their eyes wide as they took in the heated quarters. To Mirai, it was still cold. To them, it was a miracle. They looked at her furniture, her research notes, her pictures of Earth on the wall. But mostly, they looked at her. "You can sit anywhere you like," Mirai said. "I'm just going to work on some reports." She sat at her small desk and turned on her datapad. Behind her, she heard the soft sounds of cubs exploring, whispering to each other. Then, she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. Liz had reached out tentatively, just barely making contact. "Warm," Liz whispered, the shy cub's first word to her. One by one, the others grew brave enough to come closer. KL sat near her feet. Rin pressed against her leg. Nira settled on the floor beside her chair. And Tev, who had started it all, climbed back onto the bunk and curled up with Mirai's spare blanket. Mirai worked on her reports. The cubs did their learning modules on their small data devices. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the station and the soft sounds of breathing. Both human and alien. For the first time since arriving at the frozen station, Mirai did not feel cold. For the first time in their young lives, the cubs felt truly comfortable. Outside, the frozen moon turned beneath them. Inside, something new was beginning. Something that would change everything. The visits became regular. Every rest cycle, after the cubs finished their daily lessons, and their parents were deep in research work, 5 small crystalline figures would appear at Mireille's door. She always let them in. She always made room. At first, the cubs would simply sit near her, marveling at the warmth that radiated from her human body. They kept a respectful distance, still not quite sure what was proper or allowed. Mireille would work on her research while they worked on their studies. Sometimes she would explain human biology to them, showing them diagrams of how her species maintained its body temperature. "Your body burns fuel to make heat?" Kale asked one day, fascinated. "All the time?" "All the time," Mireille confirmed. "Even when I sleep. If I stop making heat, I die." The cubs found this terrifying and amazing in equal measure. Their species did not work this way at all. They drew minimal energy from their crystalline matrices, existing in a state that was almost like living stasis. The idea of constantly burning energy just to stay alive seemed exhausting. "Does it hurt?" Rin asked, bouncing slightly with nervous energy. "The burning? No," Mireille said with a laugh. "I don't feel it at all. It's just normal for me." Lys, the quiet one, had been watching Mireille closely. The shy cub rarely spoke, but when Lys did, everyone listened. "Can you turn it off? The warmth?" "No," Mireille said softly. "It's part of who I am. As long as I'm alive, I'll be warm." Tev, curled up in a corner with a blanket, made a happy sound. "Good. Don't turn it off." The arrangement worked well. The cubs' parents approved, mostly because they were busy with their research, and having the cubs occupied meant fewer interruptions. Commander Helk gave formal permission after checking that Mireille did not mind. The station's medical officer, a Veltharan named Hess, ran some basic scans to make sure the warmth was not harmful to the young ones. "Interesting," Hess said, reviewing the data. "Their crystalline matrices are actually showing improved coherence. The moderate temperature exposure seems beneficial." Mireille felt relieved. She had worried that somehow she might be hurting them without knowing it. Instead, the opposite was true. As days turned into weeks, the cubs grew more comfortable. They started bringing their favorite learning modules to show Mireille. Kale liked anything about space exploration. Rin studied movement and physics. Nira was learning about medical care. Lys, surprisingly, loved art from different species. And little Tev was fascinated by stories. Any stories from anywhere. "Tell us about Earth," Tev would beg almost every cycle. "Please." So Mireille would tell them. She told them about oceans that were liquid instead of frozen, about trees that grew toward the sun, about animals with fur and feathers. She told them about rain and snow and thunderstorms. She told them about cities full of humans, about families and friends and home. The cubs listened like she was telling them fairy tales. In a way, she was. Earth might as well have been a fantasy world to them. This place where warmth was normal and ice was temporary. One cycle, Mireille was showing them a video file from Earth. It was footage of the African savanna, with lions sleeping in a pile under a tree. The narrator explained how lions were social creatures, how they slept together for safety and comfort. "They're touching each other," Nira observed. "Is that normal?" "For lions, yes," Mireille said. "Many Earth animals do this. Humans too, sometimes. Physical contact can be comforting." Kale tilted his head, thinking. "Veltharan don't do this. We maintain space. Every species is different," Mireille said. She paused, then added carefully. "But if you ever wanted to sit closer, to feel the warmth better, that would be okay. Only if you want to." The cubs looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. Then Tev, brave little Tev, got up from the corner and walked directly to Mireille. The small cub looked up at her with glowing eyes. "Can I sit with you? Like the lions?" Mireille's heart swelled. "Of course." Tev climbed onto the bunk beside Mireille and pressed close against her side. The cub's crystalline body was cool against her, drawing heat from her warmth. Tev made a sound of pure contentment. That was all it took. Liz came next, settling against Mireille's other side. Then Rin, who curled against her legs. Nira sat behind her, back to back, and Kale, the oldest, rested his head carefully on her lap. They formed a pile, just like the lions in the video. 5 crystalline cubs arranged around one warm human. "This is nice," Rin said sleepily. "This is better than nice," Kale corrected. "This is. I don't have a word for it. Perfect," Liz whispered. "This is perfect." Mireille sat very still, afraid to move and break the moment. The cubs' bodies were cool but not uncomfortably so. Her human biology adjusted automatically, generating more heat to compensate for what they were drawing from her. It felt natural, like her body knew what to do. She looked down at them, these small alien children who had adopted her as their warmth source. They looked so peaceful. Tev's eyes were already closing. Rin's usual bouncing energy had settled into stillness. Even Nira, always alert and protective, was relaxing. "You can sleep if you want," Mireille said softly. "I'll wake you before you need to go back. Will you tell us a story?" Tev asked, voice already drowsy. So Mireille told them a story about Earth. She told them about a place called a beach, where water met land and the sun warmed everything. She told them about children playing in the sand, about the sound of waves, about the feeling of sun on skin. Her voice was soft and steady. One by one, the cubs drifted into sleep, their bioluminescent cores dimming to a gentle glow. Their breathing, if it could be called that, became slow and rhythmic. Mireille finished her story to an audience of sleeping cubs. She smiled and carefully reached for her data pad, managing to continue her work without disturbing them. She had reports to write, research to document, but her mind kept drifting back to the warm weight of the cubs around her, the trust they showed by sleeping so vulnerably in her presence. She had come to this station feeling like an outsider, a warm creature in a cold world. Now, she was beginning to feel like something else. She was beginning to feel needed. Several hours later, when it was time for the cubs to return to their quarters, Mireille gently woke them. They stirred slowly, reluctant to leave their warm pile. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Kale asked. "You can come back every day if you want," Mireille said. "We want," all 5 cubs said at once. After they left, Mireille sat alone in her quarters. The space felt emptier now. She looked at the spot where they had piled around her, and she felt something she had not felt in months. She felt happy. The next cycle, Hess came to see Mireille personally. The medical officer had been running regular scans on the cubs as part of standard health monitoring. "I need to show you something," Hess said, pulling up data on a screen. "These are the cubs' development markers from before they started visiting you. And these are from yesterday." Mireille studied the charts. She was not an expert in Veltharin biology, but even she could see the improvement. "What does this mean?" "It means they're thriving," Hess said, and there was wonder in the usually clinical voice. "Their crystalline matrices are stronger. Their cognitive functions are sharper. Whatever is happening during these visits, it's helping them develop better than standard cold exposure." "But that doesn't make sense," Mireille said. "Veltharin are supposed to need the cold." "Adults do," Hess corrected. "But cubs? Perhaps we've been wrong about what cubs need. Perhaps flexibility in youth leads to strength in adulthood." Hess sent the data to Commander Helk and the cubs' parents. A formal review was conducted. Scientists studied the numbers and debated the implications. Finally, Commander Helk made an official announcement. The arrangement could continue. More than that, it was now approved and encouraged. Researcher Han Mireille was officially permitted to provide thermal exposure to Veltharin cubs as part of a developmental study. When Mireille told the cubs the news, they celebrated in their own way. Rin did flips. Kale buzzed with excitement. Even shy Liss smiled. A subtle shift in the crystalline features. "We can keep coming?" Tev asked. "Just to be sure." "You can keep coming," Mireille confirmed. That cycle, when the cubs piled around her, Mireille felt something shift. This was not just a pleasant arrangement anymore. This was not just about warmth and comfort. This was becoming family. The arrangement worked perfectly for nearly a month. Then, problems began. It started with Tev. The smallest cub began showing signs of distress on days when Mireille had to leave the station for research expeditions. The station orbited Kyrios 7 specifically to study the moon's unique ice formations, which meant researchers regularly took shuttles down to the surface. These trips usually lasted 8 to 10 hours. The first time Mireille returned from a surface expedition, she found Tev waiting outside her quarters, curled into a small ball. The cub's bioluminescent core was flickering weakly. "Tev, what's wrong?" Mireille asked, concerned. "You were gone," Tev said in a small voice. It was cold again. Mireille felt her heart clench. She let Tev into her quarters and held the small cub close, sharing warmth until the flickering steadied. But she was worried. This was not healthy attachment. This was dependency. The pattern repeated with the other cubs. On days when Mireille was away, they became lethargic. Their performance in lessons dropped. They stopped playing. Nira, usually so protective and strong, would sit motionless for hours. Kale stopped asking his endless questions. Liss retreated into complete silence. Rin's energy disappeared entirely. Hess noticed during routine scans. "The cubs are showing stress markers on days you're absent from the station." "I know," Mireille said miserably. "I don't know what to do. I can't be here every moment." "Have you discussed this with their parents?" Mireille had tried. She scheduled meetings with each of the cubs' parent guardians. The conversations did not go well. The parents were researchers first, parents second. They viewed their offspring with scientific detachment that made Mireille uncomfortable. When she explained the cubs' distress, they seemed unconcerned. "This is a phase," one parent said dismissively. "They will adapt. Young Veltharin go through many phases of development," another added. "Emotional attachment to a warmth source is temporary." But Mireille saw the cubs as individuals, not just developmental stages. She saw Tev's fear when she left. She saw Kale's questions go unasked. She saw Liss withdraw. These were not just phases. These were children who were hurting. She took her concerns to Commander Helk. The commander listened carefully. Crystalline features unreadable. "You believe the cubs are forming unhealthy attachment?" Helk asked. "I think they need the warmth," Mireille said carefully. "But I worry about what happens when I eventually leave the station. My assignment here isn't permanent." Helk was silent for a long moment. "This is complicated." Complicated became dangerous when senior scientist Vorn got involved. Vorn was old even by Veltharin standards, a researcher who had spent 2 centuries studying crystalline biology. Vorn believed strongly in traditional Veltharin upbringing, which meant maximum cold exposure for cubs to ensure proper development. Vorn called a formal meeting of the Science Council. Mireille was required to attend. "This human's interference is damaging our young," Vorn declared before the assembled researchers. "The cubs are becoming weak, dependent on artificial warmth. They will never survive proper Veltharin conditions." Far. V. 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 "The data shows improvement in all development markers," Hess countered. "The data shows deviation from normal," Vorn snapped. "Normal is what evolution designed. Normal is cold. These cubs are being contaminated by human influence." The word contaminated made Mireille's blood boil. "I'm not contaminating anyone. The cubs come to me by choice. They are children," Vorn said coldly. "Children do not understand what is good for them. This arrangement must end. The cubs must be returned to proper cold adaptation protocols immediately. The council was divided. Some agreed with Vorn, fearing the cubs were being weakened. Others supported the continuation, pointing to the improved health markers. The debate grew heated. Commander Helk finally called for order. We will review all data and make a decision within one cycle. Until then, the current arrangement continues. Mireille left the meeting feeling shaken. She returned to her quarters to find all 5 cubs already waiting. They had heard about the meeting somehow. Information spread fast on a small station. Are they going to make us stop coming? Kale asked, trying to sound brave but failing. Mireille wanted to lie, to tell them everything would be fine. But she respected them too much for that. I don't know. Some people think the warmth is bad for you. That's stupid, Rin said fiercely. We feel better with warmth. We're stronger, not weaker. I know, Mireille said. But not everyone agrees. They sat together that cycle, but the usual comfort was tainted by worry. Even piled around Mireille, the cubs seemed tense. Nira kept looking at the door, as if expecting someone to burst in and separate them. Tev pressed closer than usual, as if trying to absorb as much warmth as possible before it was taken away. While the station argued about the cubs, Mireille was experiencing her own changes. She had noticed it gradually over the past weeks but had not really thought about it. Now, looking at medical data Hess had shared with her, she could not ignore it anymore. Her body was adapting. Extended exposure to extreme cold, combined with the regular heat loss from warming the cubs, had triggered unusual changes in her human biology. Her metabolism had become more efficient. Her body temperature regulation was more precise than normal for humans. Her brown adipose tissue, the fat that generated heat, had increased significantly. You're becoming a more efficient biological heater, Hess explained when they reviewed the data together. Your body is responding to the environmental pressure and the regular demand from the cubs. Is this dangerous? Mireille asked. Unknown. It's never been documented before. But your vital signs are all normal. Actually better than when you arrived. You're healthier now than you were 3 months ago. It was strange to think about. Her body was changing to meet the needs of 5 small alien children. Evolution, in real time. Driven by need and connection, rather than thousands of years of gradual adaptation. The crisis came 3 days later. During a solar storm, Kirios 7 star was usually stable, but occasionally it would flare. The station's shields could handle most stellar weather, but this storm was stronger than predicted. Radiation levels spiked. The station's power systems were overwhelmed, and emergency protocols engaged automatically. Non-essential systems shut down to preserve life support. That included the heating system for individual quarters. Temperature throughout the station plummeted. For adult Veltherin, this was uncomfortable, but not dangerous. For the cubs, especially cubs who had been exposed to warmer temperatures, it was life-threatening. Mireille was in her quarters when the power failed. Emergency lights came on, casting everything in a red glow. She heard the heating system shut down with a final wheeze. Within minutes, she could see her breath. Then she heard frantic knocking at her door. She opened it to find all 5 cubs, brought by Nira, who had gathered the others when the emergency started. They were already shaking, their cores flickering dangerously. Inside, quickly, Mireille said. They stumbled into her quarters. Without heating, the room was already dropping toward the ambient station temperature. Mireille's breath came in visible puffs. What's happening? Kale asked, his usual curiosity now edged with fear. Solar storm, Mireille said, trying to stay calm. Power will be back soon. Until then, we stay together. She gathered every blanket, every piece of fabric she had. She sealed the door and used tape to block the ventilation that was now just pumping in cold air. She piled everything onto her bunk and then gathered the cubs. Everyone here, close together. We're going to make a nest. They climbed onto the bunk, pressing against each other and against Mireille. She wrapped them in layers of blankets and insulation material. Then, she focused on doing the one thing she could do, She made heat. Her body went into overdrive, burning energy to produce warmth. The cubs pressed against her from all sides, drawing heat from her like small crystalline radiators. Tev was against her chest, Liss and Rin on either side. Kale and Nira against her back. They formed one mass of bodies, alien and human, sharing warmth in the cold. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, radiation battering the shields. Inside the dark quarters, Mireille held 5 shaking cubs and fought to keep them warm. She told them stories. She sang songs from Earth, even though her voice was rough and untrained. She talked about anything and everything, keeping them focused on her voice rather than the cold. Her body burned through energy at an incredible rate. She felt her stored fat converting to heat, her muscles working just to maintain temperature. Sweat formed on her skin despite the freezing air, her body's cooling system confused by the contradictory signals. The cubs' shaking gradually lessened. Pressed against her warmth, wrapped in layers of insulation, they stabilized. But it was a near thing. Through the blankets, Mireille could feel how cold they were, how close to the edge. "Stay with me," she whispered to them. "Just stay with me. Help is coming," Tev whimpered. "Mireille, I'm scared." "I know, little one. I'm here. I won't let go." 18 hours. That was how long the storm lasted. 18 hours of Mireille holding 5 cubs in the dark, her body working overtime to keep them alive. Her enhanced thermogenesis, the adaptation she had developed over weeks of warming them, now became the difference between life and death. When power finally returned and heat began flowing through the station again, Mireille was exhausted. Her body had burned through every reserve, but the cubs were safe, their cores glowing steady and strong again. The door opened. Commander Helk, Hess, and several others rushed in, having come to check on them as soon as systems allowed. They found Mireille barely conscious, surrounded by 5 sleeping cubs who were warm and alive. "Get medical," Helk ordered. But Hess was already scanning. "She saved them," Hess said quietly. Her body temperature dropped to dangerous levels, but she maintained enough heat transfer to keep the cubs stable. By all calculations, they should have crystallized. She kept them from dying. News of what happened spread through the station instantly. The debate about whether the cubs should continue seeing Mireille ended abruptly. Even Vorn said nothing when confronted with the evidence of what Mireille's warmth had accomplished. When Mireille woke up in medical, properly heated and recovering, the first thing she saw was 5 small, crystalline faces pressed against the window of her room. Watching her with worried eyes, she smiled at them and lifted one weak hand in a wave. They waved back, cores blazing with joy and relief. But Mireille's smile faded when she saw Commander Helk waiting to speak with her. "Researcher Mireille, we need to discuss your assignment." And Mireille knew, with sinking certainty, that everything was about to change again. Mireille sat in the medical bay, recovered enough to be out of bed, but still weak from her ordeal during the storm. Commander Helk stood near the window, looking out at the frozen moon below. "Your assignment here was always temporary," Helk began. 6 months. You have been here for 4 months now. In 6 weeks, you are scheduled to return to Earth." The words hit Mireille like a physical blow. She had known this, of course. But somehow, wrapped up in daily life with the cubs, she had stopped thinking about it. 6 weeks, she repeated numbly. "Yes. The transport ship arrives then." Helk turned to face her. "After what happened during the storm, after seeing how important you have become to the cubs, I thought you should know. You need time to prepare. They need time to prepare." Mireille felt her throat tighten. "How do I tell them?" "Carefully," Helk said. That cycle, when the cubs came to visit, Mireille could barely look at them. They piled around her as usual, seeking warmth and comfort. She held them and felt her heart breaking. Finally, she could not put it off any longer. "I need to tell you something." They all looked at her. 5 pairs of glowing eyes, trusting and innocent. My time here is temporary. In 6 weeks, I have to go back to Earth. Silence. No, Tev said simply. I don't want to go. Mireille said, her voice cracking. But I have to. Humans can't stay away from Earth forever. I have family there. Obligations. Then we'll come with you, Kale said with the absolute certainty only children possess. You can't, Mireille said gently. Earth is too warm for you. Your bodies are designed for cold. Earth's warmth would destabilize your crystalline structure. You could die. Then you stay, Liz whispered, speaking up despite being the quiet one. Please. I can't, Mireille said, tears forming in her eyes. I'm sorry. Rin jumped up, agitated. There has to be a way. There has to be something. But there was not. Not that Mireille could see. Not yet. The cubs left her quarters that cycle subdued and quiet. Mireille sat alone and cried. Something she had not done since arriving at the station. The next few days were difficult. The cubs still came to visit. But everything felt different. There was a sadness in the air. A sense of ending. Tev clung to Mireille more than ever. Even Kale's questions stopped. The curious cub too unhappy to think about learning. Mireille could not accept this. She could not just leave them. There had to be another way. Thanks for watching. She threw herself into research. She spent every free moment in the station's database, reading everything about Veltharan biology, about crystalline life forms, about adaptation and development. Hess found her in the research library 3 days later, surrounded by data screens. What are you doing? The medical officer asked. Looking for a solution, Mireille said. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. There has to be a way. Mireille, you cannot change fundamental biology. Can't I? Mireille pulled up her own medical data. Look at this. Look at what my body did. I adapted to this environment in weeks. I became a better heater because that's what was needed. Why can't they adapt, too? Hess studied the screens, crystalline features showing interest. You think the cubs could adapt to warmer temperatures? They're young. Young organisms have plasticity, right? The ability to adapt? Mireille was talking fast, excited despite her exhaustion. What if cubs can handle more temperature variation than adults? What if we've been keeping them too cold? Not challenging their adaptive abilities. This is speculation, Hess said. But the medical officer did not sound dismissive. Hess sounded interested. They worked together, reviewing data. They looked at the cubs' development over the past months. They studied how Mireille's body had changed. They built models and ran simulations. After 2 days of intense work, they had a hypothesis. Young Veltharan might have greater adaptive capacity than previously believed. If exposed to gradually increasing temperatures during their developmental stage, they might become temperature flexible. They might be able to thrive in both cold and moderate environments. It was revolutionary. It was also risky. No one had ever tried this before. We need to present this to the Science Council, Hess said. The meeting was tense. Mireille presented their research, showing data and projections. She explained how the cubs could potentially adapt, becoming bridge individuals who could operate in multiple temperature ranges. This would make them valuable for interspecies cooperation, she argued. Veltharan, who can work comfortably with warm species, would be assets to the Galactic Council. Vorn immediately opposed. You want to experiment on our cubs? To change their fundamental nature. I want to give them options, Mireille countered. Right now, Veltharan cubs grow up in extreme cold and can never leave. What if they could choose? What if they could visit other worlds, work with other species, experience more of the galaxy? The council debated for hours. Finally, Commander Helk called for a vote. The result was close, but the council approved further study. However, they required one critical thing: consent. The cubs themselves had to agree. They had to understand the risks and choose for themselves. Mireille gathered all 5 cubs in her quarters. She sat down with them and explained everything honestly. She told them about the adaptation idea, about the gradual temperature increases, about the potential risks. Your bodies might not be able to adapt, she said. This could fail. It could hurt you. I need you to understand that. But if it works? Kale asked. If it works, you could eventually tolerate moderate temperatures. Not Earth-level warmth, but warmer than you're used to. Warm enough that we could find a way to stay together. She did not promise anything. She could not. But she laid out the possibility. One by one, she asked them what they wanted. Kale said yes immediately. I want to learn about other worlds. I can't do that stuck in the cold. Rin bounced with excitement. Yes, let's try it. Nira thought carefully before nodding. If it helps us stay with you. Yes. Liz simply reached out and took Mirai's hand. Yes. Everyone looked at Tev, the smallest, who had started this all by seeking warmth in the first place. I'm scared, Tev said honestly. But I'm more scared of you leaving. Mirai felt tears stream down her face. You're all so brave. The cubs' parents were informed. They signed the necessary documents with clinical detachment. To them, this was an interesting experiment. To Mirai and the cubs, it was everything. The adaptation program was approved to begin immediately. But there was one more obstacle. 3 days later, a message arrived from the Veltherin homeworld. Someone had sent a formal complaint about the situation on the station. That someone was clearly Vorn, though the senior scientist denied it. The homeworld government was sending an inspector to review the situation. The inspector would have final authority over whether the program could continue. The inspector's name was Sora, and she was ancient even by Veltharan standards. 3 centuries old, she had never left cold environments in her entire long life. She was traditional, conservative, and powerful. When Sora arrived, the entire station went quiet. This inspector would decide everything. The cubs' future, Mirai's work, all of it rested on what Sora decided. The inspection lasted 3 days. Sora watched everything silently. She observed the cubs with Mirai. She reviewed all medical data. She interviewed the cubs' parents, Commander Helk, Hess, and Vorn. She watched the cubs learn, play, and pile around their human for warmth. Sora revealed nothing of her thoughts. The ancient inspector simply watched, measured, and considered. Finally, Sora called for a formal hearing. Everyone was required to attend. The cubs, their parents, Mirai, Vorn, Commander Helk, Hess, and the rest of the Science Council gathered in the main conference room. Sora stood before them, tall and imposing, crystalline body catching the light. I came here expecting to find corruption, Sora said, voice carrying the weight of centuries. Weakness, a human overstepping boundaries and damaging our young. Mirai's heart sank. This was it. Sora was going to shut everything down. Instead, Sora continued, I found something I have not seen in many cycles. Joy. The room went still. I watched these cubs laugh, Sora said. I watched them play. I watched them thrive in ways young Veltherin rarely do anymore. Our species has become rigid. We prioritize purity over happiness, tradition over growth. Sora turned to look directly at Vorn. You claim the human contaminates our cubs. I say our cubs contaminate nothing. They are simply finding happiness in a way we no longer remember. Tech. One saw. To the sea. There sops it lost of B, and the describer bass. The ancient inspector faced the assembled group. The warmth did not weaken them. It freed them. And if these cubs can bridge cold and warmth, if they can become individuals who thrive in multiple environments, they represent not contamination, but hope. Hope that our species can evolve. Hope that we can connect with others. Hope that tradition need not mean stagnation. Apparently, with my never one taken awful, Sora's judgment rang out clear and final. The temperature adaptation program is approved. Researcher Han Mireille will remain on this station as Director of Interspecies Developmental Studies. Her assignment is extended indefinitely. The cubs will begin gradual adaptation under medical supervision. Furthermore, I will recommend to the homeworld that this program be offered as an option for other Veltherin youth. Mireille could not breathe. The cubs were making high-pitched sounds of joy. Even Hess looked shocked. Vorn said nothing, but the senior scientist's crystalline form seemed to dim in defeat. Sora looked at Mireille. Do not disappoint me, human. Show us that evolution is not betrayal. Show us that adaptation is survival. I will, Mireille promised. Thank you. After the hearing, the cubs piled around Mireille in a jumble of excited crystalline bodies, all talking at once. You're staying. We can try the adaptation. We don't have to say goodbye. Mireille held them all, laughing and crying at the same time. Tev pressed against her heart, right where the small cub had first discovered warmth. We're going to be okay, Mireille whispered to them. All of us together. Outside the window, stars turned in the void. Inside, warmth and hope bloomed in the cold. The adaptation program began slowly and carefully. Every week, the temperature in the cubs' living areas increased by 1 degree. It was a tiny change, barely noticeable, but over time, it would add up. Hess monitored the cubs constantly. Medical scans every day, watching their crystalline structures for any signs of destabilization. Mireille watched them even more closely, looking for behavioral changes, for discomfort, for anything that might mean they needed to stop. But the cubs handled it beautifully. Their young bodies adapted just as Mireille had hoped. Their crystalline matrices adjusted to the slightly warmer temperatures without losing coherence. If anything, they seemed to become stronger, more flexible. The gradual challenge was making them more resilient, not weaker. Mireille's quarters were expanded into a proper research facility. Part of it remained her living space. But now, there were multiple temperature zones. The cubs could move between cooler and warmer areas, always in control of their own comfort level. They could retreat to cold if needed, or seek warmth when they wanted it. The pile ritual continued. Every rest cycle, the cubs would gather around Mireille. As they adapted to warmer temperatures, they needed her direct body heat less, but they wanted it just as much. The warmth had become about more than temperature. It had become about belonging. Other young Veltherin started asking questions. They saw the cubs thriving and became curious. Soon, Mireille had more cubs requesting to visit, to try the warmth, to see if they too could adapt. She accepted them carefully, never pushing, always letting them proceed at their own pace. The original 5 cubs helped, becoming guides for the newcomers. Kyle explained the science behind adaptation. Nira made sure everyone felt safe. Even Shy Liss opened up, showing other cubs that it was okay to be afraid at first. Within 2 months, Mireille was working with 15 cubs. Within 4 months, 25. Her research facility became a haven, a place where being different was celebrated rather than feared. The cubs' development patterns amazed researchers across the station. They were hitting all their normal markers, but they were also gaining new abilities. They could tolerate temperature swings that would have distressed pure, cold-adapted Veltherin. They were learning to regulate their own heat retention, something adult Veltherin could not do. They're becoming bridge individuals, Hess said, reviewing the data with wonder. Truly comfortable in multiple environments. Not everyone was happy about this. Vorn remained opposed, though the senior scientist could no longer speak openly against a program approved by Inspector Sora. But there were others who shared Vorn's views, who worried about losing traditional Veltherin identity. Mireille tried to be understanding. Change was always scary, especially for long-lived species where tradition spanned centuries. But she also knew that the cubs deserved choices. They deserved the chance to explore and grow beyond the limitations of their birth. 6 months into the program, Mireille received a message from Earth. It was from the Human Interspecies Exchange Committee, asking her to report on her work. She recorded a long video message, explaining everything that had happened. "I came here to study aliens," she said into the camera. "I thought I was here to learn about crystalline biology and cold adaptation. But that's not what I learned at all." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I learned that connection transcends biology. I learned that warmth isn't just about temperature. It's about caring. It's about choosing to share what you have with those who need it, even when they're nothing like you." 151. I-15. Behind her, cubs played in the various temperature zones of her facility. The original 5 were there, now bigger and stronger than when she had first met them. Tev was helping a new cub learn to tolerate a warmer room. Kale was explaining something enthusiastically to a group of fascinated youngsters. Rin was leading games that involved moving between temperature zones. Liz was creating art, beautiful crystalline sculptures that could only form at specific temperatures. Nira was, as always, making sure everyone was safe and happy. "The cubs sleep in a pile around me," Mireille continued. "Not because they have to anymore. They can generate enough heat themselves now. They sleep with me because it makes them feel safe and loved. Because warmth, real warmth, is about belonging." She smiled at the camera. "Home isn't a place. Home isn't a planet or a temperature or a species. Home is wherever you choose to share your warmth. And I found my home here, in the cold, surrounded by crystalline children who taught me what warmth really means." The message was transmitted to Earth. It would take weeks to arrive, traveling across the vast distances between stars. 1 year after Mireille first arrived at the station, Inspector Sora returned. The ancient Veltharin walked through the research facility, observing everything. The cubs, now confident and comfortable, greeted Sora politely but without fear. "Show me," Sora commanded. Kale gave a presentation on temperature adaptation biology. Liz displayed her hybrid art. Rin demonstrated movement exercises in variable temperatures. Nira explained the mentorship structure. And little Tev, no longer the smallest or weakest, talked about how warmth had changed everything. "I was always cold before," Tev said simply. "Now I'm not. Now I get to choose." Sora listened to it all. Then the ancient inspector asked to speak with Mireille privately. They stood in the observation deck, looking out at the frozen moon that had brought them together. "You have done something remarkable here," Sora said. "You have changed the future of our species." "The cubs did that," Mireille said. "I just provided warmth." "No," Sora said firmly. "You provided hope. You showed us that we could be more than we were. The homeworld is implementing adaptation programs on 3 more stations. Other species are asking about similar programs for their young. You started something that will ripple across the galaxy." Mireille felt overwhelmed. "I just wanted to help 5 cold cubs. That is how all great changes begin. Small kindnesses that grow into movements." Sora turned to face her. "What will you do now? Will you stay here? Return to Earth? You have choices too." Mireille looked through the window. Inside the facility, she could see the cubs gathering for rest cycle. They were looking around, searching for her. The original 5 were rounding up the others, organizing them, getting ready for pile time. "I'll stay," Mireille said. "This is my home now." That cycle, when the cubs piled around Mireille, it was different from that first time so long ago. There were more of them now. They were stronger, more confident. They did not need her warmth the same desperate way they once had. But they still came. They still formed their pile. Because it was not about need anymore. It was about want, about choice, about family. The original 5 claimed their usual spots, with newer cubs arranging themselves around the edges. Tev pressed against Mireille's heart, the small cub's favorite place. Liz leaned on her shoulder. Kale rested his head on her lap. Rin curled against her legs. Nira sat behind her, protective, as always. "Tell us a story," one of the newer cubs requested, so Mireille told them about Earth. But this time, she also told them about Kyrios 7, about the frozen moon that had become a place of warmth and growth, about how home could be anywhere, as long as you had people, or cubs, who loved you. Her voice was soft and steady. The cubs' bioluminescent cores glowed in the dimmed light, making the room look full of stars. Some of them drifted to sleep. Others stayed awake, listening. Outside, the universe was vast and cold and full of distance between stars. Inside, there was warmth. Not just the warmth of a human body that generated heat, but the warmth of connection, of choosing each other, of building family across the impossible gap between species. Mireille looked down at the cubs around her. Crystalline and strange and beautiful and hers. They looked up at her with glowing eyes, seeing not a human or an alien, but simply Mireille, the warm one, the storyteller, the one who stayed. "You're the best thing that ever happened to us," Tev murmured sleepily. "No," Mireille said softly, running her fingers over the cub's crystalline head. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." More cubs drifted to sleep. Their breathing became slow and rhythmic. Their cores dimmed to gentle glows. They slept in their pile, safe and warm and loved. Mireille stayed awake a while longer, keeping watch over them. She thought about her journey here, about everything that had changed. She had come to this station, lonely and cold, an outsider in an alien world. Now she was surrounded by warmth, not the warmth of Earth's sun or heated blankets. Better warmth, the warmth of belonging, the warmth of being needed and choosing to stay, the warmth of love that crossed every boundary of biology and species. She had told the cubs that warmth was home. She had been right. Home was not Earth anymore. Home was not any planet. Home was here. In a research station, orbiting a frozen moon, surrounded by crystalline cubs who slept in a pile around her. Cubs who had once been cold, but were now thriving. Cubs who would grow up able to bridge worlds, to connect species, to choose their own paths. Cubs who would always remember that warmth, real warmth, came from choosing to share what you had with those who needed it. Mireille closed her eyes and let herself drift toward sleep. Around her, the cubs breathed softly. The station hummed its familiar sounds. The frozen moon turned below, and in the vast cold universe, in one small warm room, a human and 25 crystalline cubs formed a pile and slept together. Family, forged not from biology but from choice. Home, built not from familiar ground but from shared warmth, the best kind of warmth. The kind that never faded. The kind that lasted forever. Home,